Well, I'm joined now by our panel of political commentators. Mira Ahmad is a Liberal commentator, Andrew Brander is a Conservative commentator, and Anne McGrath is the National Director of the New Democratic Party. Good to see you all. Mira, let me start with you. There's the ongoing debate over inflation, food prices skyrocketing. A new report on that out today. Housing prices out of reach for many Canadians, especially younger Canadians. The House debate today debating a motion, a Conservative motion on the housing crisis. And I guess I'm wondering, what should Canadians expect from their policymakers in terms of mitigating the effects of the rising cost of living?
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, certainly the rising cost of food and housing, the studies published today predicting the 5 to 7% increase is extremely concerning for Canadians and for folks around the world. This is a challenge that isn't unique to Canada. Countries around the world, including the United States, are more and more experiencing the impacts of COVID-19 as they relate to similar rates of inflation and rising costs. We're not out of the woods yet with COVID-19. It will get better, but climate change, on the other hand, is getting worse. And the reality of climate-driven inflation is going to continue. So, this government's plan to move forward on $10 a day childcare, putting home ownership back in reach and cutting taxes, taking bolder climate action is going to help us fight this and make life more affordable. I think it's important to add, the Conservatives have been very quick to blame the government policies on high inflation and the rise of food costs. But the reality is that these rising costs aren't a result of, the government's fiscal policies. Okay. They're tied to the pandemic and global supply chain disruptions and climate change as well.
All right, Andrew, look, rising inflation outstripping wage increases, Canadians losing ground here. What's the right response from government?
Well, I think the right response is certainly not saying, "Oh, well, the pandemic's going on, so we're just going to have to deal with these rising prices of everything." Quite frankly, it's been a long 24 months. People have been brought to their wits' end in terms of their stress levels and anxiety. And now, in addition to that, they're having to worry even more about what's in the bank account at the end of the day. And as these reports signal, it's not slowing down. Next year, it's going to be even worse. And so I think what we would, first of all, I love the fact that we're actually having a debate on this finally, and actually talking about it. And I think what we need to see from policymakers is a commitment to study it more deeply and actually start taking some measures around providing some relief. And relief isn't in the form of taking it out of one envelope and putting it back in another. So making childcare more affordable for people is not going to help lower the price of their grocery bill at the end of the day.
Well, we hear lots of solutions, and earlier on my program we heard from a food expert, in fact the lead researcher on the food price study out today, that the focus should be on food affordability. So if costs are rising, buying power should keep pace. For instance, incomes and taxation at levels that allow families to keep pace with rising food prices that they don't control. So where do you think the solutions lie?
Well, I think that, first of all, I think that there is kind of got to be a holistic look at this. I don't think that you can say, as the Conservatives have, that this is purely a problem that has been driven by the spending on the pandemic. And I think that they may be trying to set up calls for austerity or those kinds of things. But, the spending on the pandemic was necessary, in my view. Not just in my view. I mean, people needed those supports. And we're actually obviously very worried about things like the GIS clawback and other things in the bill that looks like it's trying to end some of those pandemic support. So it can't just all be laid at the feet of the pandemic spending. On the other hand, it is also not right to say that the government doesn't have some ability to do some things about this, and they do. Housing affordability was mentioned. That is a huge driver of inflation. With respect to groceries, I think groceries are everybody experiences that. people who are doing very well might not notice as much as others how much the price of things have gone up, but it is very noticeable for all of us who go to the grocery store to buy groceries. It's very noticeable.
It's going to be $1,000 more for groceries in the coming year. I think everybody's going to notice.
That is very, very noticeable.
Mira,
and the answer there cannot be like so on food prices. I mean, there's a variety of things that can happen, but one thing I know is that consumers are feeling the squeeze. It's not workers who are reaping the benefits of that, the workers in the grocery stores who are deemed essential during the pandemic. But, we do have some major grocery chains who are doing very, very well.
Lots to cover on this in days ahead. And the debate is sort of fully fueled now, I think. Mira, the Auditor General's report came out today pointing out in no uncertain terms the failings of the government and its agencies on border measures that they've been taking during the pandemic. Testing at airports, mandatory quarantines, they can't demonstrate they're actually effective because so much information is missing and can't be tracked down. What's your reaction to those findings, and how much confidence should Canadians have in the government's handling of the border?
I'll start by saying I think, this government has always been the first to say that things can be better. We know the pandemic took everybody by surprise. This is a once-in-a-generation health crisis that created major challenges and is continuing to challenge every single Canadian across the country. Measures were implemented by the federal government quickly to provide immediate support to ensure as many people as possible were kept safe. And I think Canadians recognize that the government did their best. And when you're in a crisis, decisions need to be made quickly. If they're not, you're vulnerable, and the decision might not be made in time. So certainly not perfect. The Auditor General has an incredibly important responsibility, and I expect the government to welcome the feedback and to implement changes to the respect of the feedback that was given.
Andrew, what are your thoughts on what the Auditor General had to say today?
Look, I agree with Mira. I think there's, there a lot of Canadians are willing to cut the government a bit of slack for what was, we were unprepared for a pandemic. The problem with this is that the pandemic's not over, and we're facing the exact same problems today with questions we see in recent days around what is being implemented at the border. So my concern is obviously these are very troubling serious numbers. Just looking at them very quickly here, 75% of travelers who flew into Canada, they're not sure if they stayed at quarantine hotels or not. 14% of people who tested positive weren't even informed that they had been tested positive. How can we have any confidence that these errors have been resolved between the time the Auditor General looked at it and today? And that's the bigger concern that the government actually has to answer for today.
Let me to close out here. Let me hear you on this. And also on the issue of temporary foreign workers, the Auditor General found not only was the inspection process at their living quarters, designed the inspection process to make sure they were protected against COVID-19 and spread, that the safety regulations were essentially ignored. She warned them, gave them a chance to make it better, and it got worse. What are we supposed to make of that?
Yeah. No, absolutely. I mean, I do think that there has been a kind of a haphazard and inconsistent approach to border and travel, and just the travel ban that's in place now that doesn't actually impact the countries where the newest variant was actually first found. So I think that there is a lot to be said about the border, and I think that she made some really, really good points about that. With respect to temporary foreign workers, you're absolutely right. Like and she's right, that what happened there was scandalous. And as we were going through different stages of the virus and looking at places where it was really running rampant, you could see that it was in places like the Cargill meat processing plant in Alberta, or some of the places in the Peel region outside Toronto, Brampton, and other places in the Peel region, where there are a lot of, honestly, there are a lot of racialized workers working in very tight quarters and very difficult conditions, and there was like a breeding ground for the virus to spread. Right. So I think, and there were a lot of people who were pointing that out, but there were not measures that were being taken around that. So Amazon continued to get their profits, but workers continued to get sick.
All right. Time is short tonight. Wish we had more of it. But Mira, Andrew, and Anne, thank you all for giving me your perspectives this evening, and take care. We'll talk again.
Thank you.
Good evening, Peter.
Thanks, Peter.